During the third week of March, I had a very peculiar thing happen to me. Sometime in the night of March the 21st at the cabin, I awoke and found myself unable to move, or even to open my eyes. I had the distinct impression that there was something in my left nostril, and that it was being slowly moved far up my nose. When I tried to struggle, I heard a pop, like an apple crunching between my eyes. The next thing I remembered, it was morning. I noticed during the day that my nose hurt. There was a little bleeding, but as my wife and son had reported similar injuries without the memory of something being in their noses the week before, I assumed that this was the result of a head cold and dry winter air. But I never came down with a cold. I thought no more about this until July the 26th, 1986, when I received a letter from Donald Klein in which he mentioned that many of my symptoms were consistent with an abnormality in the temporal lobe, and that the method of testing this involved a nasal probe. The temporal lobe is arguably the most important part of the brain, the seat of humanity itself. It is in the temporal lobe that sense is made out of perceptions. People with temporal lobe epilepsy report déjà vu, unexplained panic states, strong smells, and even a preoccupation with philosophical and cosmic concerns. They also sometimes report vivid hallucinatory journeys. Initially, I seized on this as a way to explain my whole experience. But the more I studied temporal lobe disorder, the less it seemed an answer. It did not explain the overwhelming sense of the real connected with my experiences. It did not explain the physical consequences. It did not explain the witnesses. Temporal lobe epilepsy was nothing more than another speculation, essentially no different and no more supportable than the visitor hypothesis or any of the other hypotheses that I had put forward. I decided that I would arrange 2 separate temporal lobe tests, one by a neurologist recommended by Dr. Klein and another through a different psychiatrist. This second neurologist carried out the same preliminary examination done by Dr. Klein's man and came to the same conclusion. There was no evidence of abnormality. I went to a lab, took chloral hydrate, and endured the insertion of electrodes deep into my nasal cavity. A few days later, the results came back. Absolutely normal temporal lobe function confirmed by both neurologists. There was one incident that is worth recounting because it was this incident more than any other that opened the door to the past. The night of Friday, February the 7th, we spent in our apartment in the city. I was absolutely frantic. I had an awful feeling. I felt their presence. It was palpable. Most upsetting, I could smell them. I could smell a distinct odor as if of smoldering cardboard, and it was familiar from the past. My wife could also smell this odor. It was one we had both smelled many times. There was also another odor, as if of cheese and cinnamon, that I remembered from December the 26th. I remained lying in bed, sweaty and sleepless. I was shocked to discover that 4 hours had passed without my noticing, very suddenly. I was reading at midnight, turned a page, and saw by the clock it was 4 a.m., and I was no longer wearing my pajamas. When I got up the next morning, I found 2 little triangles inscribed on my left forearm. I don't know what happened, and there was no way at all to explain the event in a conventional manner. The larger triangle was quite straight, delicately incised, in just the outer few skin layers, as if by the work of a skilled master surgeon. The other triangle, very tiny, was pointing at the larger one. On the morning of February the 8th, I stood looking down at those triangles, with the shower pounding on my back. I also remembered the odors I had smelled the night before. Odor is an excellent trigger of memory, and the odor of smoldering seemed to unlock a lot of doors. I last smelled it in 1972 or 1973. My wife and I had gone down to San Antonio to see my family, and we were sleeping in my sister's old bedroom on the second floor of the house. In the middle of the night, I suddenly awoke with the impression that I had just heard a loud noise. I decided to get a glass of water. As I left our bedroom, I noticed a strange smell, like smoldering cardboard. As I went toward the bathroom to get my water, a small, dark figure with a red light in its hand burst out of my old bedroom and dashed downstairs. I was momentarily astonished, but decided that it must have been a family member. The fact that this individual was much smaller than a human being did not bother me in the least, nor even give me pause. Why not? Maybe for the same reason that none of us remembered the events of the night of October the 4th. I searched on, deep into my past. At the age of 9, I had been sleeping out with a friend on a lovely Texas summer night when something woke us up in the wee hours, perhaps an owl killing a rat, the stopping of the crickets, or moonset. In any case, we found ourselves awake and deliciously alone in the dark. We went exploring the quiet slips of the night. The vacant lot behind our house was then an acre of tall sunflowers, taller than either of us boys. We were wandering through these stalks when we heard someone coming toward us. My friend turned and ran. I stood there, then turned and ran as well. When I reached our sleeping bags, I was astonished to find him already so completely asleep that I could not wake him up. How could he have gone from running in terror to being dead to the world like that? Why hadn't he gone running into the house? He and I also saw a huge object cross the sky one summer night, an event I have always remembered as particularly strange. I called him after a lapse of 25 years. We talked for some time, and then I asked him about those 2 nights. I told him nothing specific about my other experiences, nor did I discuss visitors. Of the first memory, he said, "We were probably just scared by a dog." He had this to say about the second. "Oh, yes, I remember that thing. It was huge. It looked just like... It was strange looking. And there was a black car. Now, I remembered that, too. Immediately after the object passed overhead, an old black car showing no lights went racing down the road in the same direction that the object had gone." From the night at age 9 to the event in Austin in September 1967, there were few specific recollections except those that emerged under hypnosis, and none was clear. By 1967, I was attending the University of Texas. In the last week of August, I had just rented a new studio apartment and moved back to Austin from San Antonio for the semester when I had an experience I now understand to have been what is known as a missing time experience, lasting at least 24 hours. I had moved into the apartment the day before and was sitting on the couch about noon, eating a TV dinner, when I was confused to discover that the dinner seemed to have hopped from my lap onto the coffee table and gone cold. I remember getting up to reheat the food and noticing that it was already 2 p.m. I decided I had fallen asleep while eating. I put the TV dinner in the oven and turned on the timer to heat it for 15 minutes. Then I turned back to the oven to check the temperature setting. I was suddenly woozy, my mouth dry, and the sun was going down outside. The dinner was cold again, and I had, and have, no memory of how the intervening hours had passed. I got scared, deciding that I had been the victim of blackouts, and I tried to make a phone call for help. It was midnight by the oven clock when I put my hand on the phone. It was exactly as if 6 hours had somehow passed in less than a second. I then began trying to make my way out of the dark apartment. I was terrified. I shook with fear and was so thirsty I could barely stand it. The next thing I knew, I was in front of the sink. The water was running and running into a full glass. My watch said 4:15. I rushed out of the door of the apartment and found myself in the cool of a Texas pre-dawn. At this point, I remembered something of awesome beauty taking place in the sky, which I later told my friends must have been a display of the Perseid meteor shower, which was not active then, but had been early in August. I drove to an all-night restaurant and had a huge breakfast and at least 6 glasses of orange juice. Some weeks later, there was a frightening sequel. I was lying in bed at my grandmother's house in San Antonio reading Time magazine. I was suddenly transported back in time and back to Austin a few weeks earlier. I leaped into my car and backed out of the apartment house parking lot. It was night and the windows of the car were closed. I couldn't see out at all. In fact, I could see nothing but the reflection of the inside of the car. I was so blind that I was forced to stop. Something approached the car. I was frightened to see, peering in the window with its face pressed almost to the glass, what seemed almost to be a demon with a narrow face and dark, slanted eyes. It spoke to me in a high, squeaky voice, and I remember saying that we couldn't leave the car out in the middle of the street. Then I found myself in an agonizing struggle. I was at once in the car, fighting to keep driving away, but unable to overcome an urge to get out and go back into the apartment, while simultaneously fighting in the real world an overwhelming urge to get out of bed and rush outside. Then it ended. The magazine was still propped up on my lap. This terrible nightmare had obviously caused not a stir. I believe now that this was a nightmare memory of an attempt I made to escape whatever unearthly thing happened to me in my apartment in Austin. I was reliving an experience which at the time it happened was so unspeakably terrifying that I still don't recall the actual event, only the dream. Then began a pattern of running that has persisted in my life until the present. A few weeks later, I suddenly became obsessed with the notion of getting away from the University of Texas, out of the United States, of going wherever I could, as far away as possible. I obtained a loan to study film at the London School of Film Technique. By January 1968, I had saved enough money and left for London. My first few months in London were bliss. Then, in July, there was another incident. I was at a friend's flat in the King's Road, Chelsea. For years I have described it as a raid, from which I escaped by crossing the roofs. What I actually remember is a period of complete perceptual chaos, followed by the confusing sensation of looking down into the chimney pots of buildings. Then there was blackness. I woke up the next morning in my own place with no idea of how I got there. The next day, I decided to leave London for the continent. I couldn't stand England for another week, not another hour. I took the train to Italy, second class. On the train, I met a young woman and we began to travel together. At this point, my memories become extremely odd. I recall that we went to Rome, but that we spent a few days in Florence on the way. For some reason, I left the young woman in Rome and dashed off on the train with no ticket, traveling almost at random. I ended up in Strasbourg, where I saw the cathedral, then suddenly rushed to the station and grabbed another train, a local, that crept across France, ending at Portbou on the Spanish border. There I took a Spanish train to Barcelona. I was broke, so I holed up in a back room in a hotel on the Ramblas. I can remember nights of terror, being afraid to put out the light, or wanting to keep the window and door locked. The rest of the memory is a jumbled mess. I am just not certain what happened, except that I lost weeks of time. I returned to London in an odd way weeks later than I had planned, with no way to explain those weeks. If such incidents were a frequent occurrence in my life, I might suspect some sort of trance or fugue state. There are certainly many odd incidents, but they are too variable in their nature to suggest the symptomatic consistency of disease. In January of 1980, Anne and I took an apartment on the top floor of a high-rise on East 75th Street. All went well until September of that year. This episode began when I saw a strange light streak down the night sky. It moved faster than an airplane and left me with the feeling that it had something to do with me. I was deeply and inexplicably moved, and left with an obscure foreboding. In the middle of the night we were awakened by our son's crying. He was desperate, almost wild with terror. I rushed into the living room, heading for his bedroom. I recall the impression of a small, dark figure dashing toward the sliding doors that led to our 33rd floor balcony. Then there was a terrific explosion, and the beads of glass burst out of the pantry. I kept running for my terrified baby, reaching his crib after what seemed an eternity. I cradled him in my arms while Anne rushed through the house, turning on lights. Then she took our son, and I went to see what on earth had happened. A siphon of seltzer had exploded so violently that the glass was reduced to beads, to dust. There wasn't a trace of the water that had been inside. Anne cleaned up the mess while I calmed our son. Then we went back to bed. In November, we closed on a co-op, and by January 1981 had moved again, this time to our present apartment in the village. A year passed in the village, quite pleasantly and uneventfully. Then came what we called the incident of the white thing. One night, Anne woke up screaming and reported that something had poked her in the stomach. She had seen it, too. It was translucent white and about 3 feet tall. She was greatly agitated. Naturally, we took this to be a nightmare. Nothing more was said about it. Certainly, nothing was said to our son. The next night, at about 10, I was sitting up and reading. Anne had just turned over to go to sleep. Suddenly, I was struck on the arm. As I turned, I saw a small, pale shape withdrawing into the hall. I jumped up and followed it, only to find the hall empty. It hadn't been our son. He was peacefully asleep in bed. A few nights later, our son suddenly began screaming the house down. I leaped out of bed and went to him. He was terribly frightened. He said that a little white thing had come up to his bed and poked me. Neither Anne nor our son showed any physical evidence of injury. Once we reviewed this apparent past material, Don Klein and I decided to go fishing in it. We decided to cover the night at my grandmother's house, the fall of 1980 in New York, and anything else that might be of interest. This time, we tried for a very, very deep trance. We went first to the incident at my grandmother's house in 1967. The images were startlingly real, almost as vivid as if I were there again 20 years ago. "Granny's in the other room," I began. "She's reading, too. I see her light is still on. The rest of the house is dark." I turn a page. There's an ad for a car. Just staring at the ad. God damn, something's buzzing around in here. I'm fighting it. All of a sudden, it puts something on my head like a railroad spike. A silver nail. And I turn into something else. I'm heavy and big. I get up out of bed. I feel totally different. I feel like I'm moving, like I'm walking through the house, like I'm a ghost in the house. No, I'm not. I'm still in bed. Oh, it's so peculiar. Because I never moved at all. I get up and get a glass of water. I'm scared to death. I don't know why this happened to me. Try and relax now. Relax, Dr. Klein said. We talked about another time where you thought you saw a meteorite? Yeah. How old are you now? I'm 36. Tell me what happened. I'm working very hard on my new book. I feel pretty good about it. And looking out over the city one night, the sun had just set, and it was beautiful orange glow. You could see the streetlights everywhere. I loved that den I had then. It's so beautiful of you. When it's clear, I can see all the way up to Bear Mountain. And then I saw this meteor. It came down out of the sky. Very tiny, like a spark. And I felt awed. Like it was someone coming to see me. I told Anne about it. And I went to bed. I love her so much. You know, I can't believe I'm seeing this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I look up from my book and there are 6 figures standing at the end of the bed looking right at both of us. She's turned over and she's asleep. I say, Anne, look at this. They're menacing looking. I don't understand where they even could have come from. They make no sound. I feel like I've just gotten some kind of weight on me. I want to get up. I'm thinking about my son. I do not know what's going on in here. They're just standing there. They don't say anything. They don't even look like they're alive. Now, am I seeing things? I close my eyes. I open my eyes. And it's changed. Now they're around both sides of the bed, about halfway up. Like when you stop looking at them, they start moving. I've lost my mind. I have lost my mind. This cannot be real. Anne. I shake Anne. I don't stop looking at them. They're wearing uniforms. Why in the world won't Anne wake up? It's like I'm in another world. Oh, this is really foul nightmare. Who's that standing out there? I get the feeling this place is full of people. Our boy says, "Oh," and he screams out loud, real loud. They pull all right down to the foot of the bed, and I get up and I'm running like hell, and he's screaming like hell, and that praying mantis is standing right in the middle of the living room. I run on into my boy, and he's put his arms out, and I never saw that little boy scream like that before. Anne! What the hell was that? I pick him up. She comes in. We're holding him. Both of us are holding him. He finally calms down. What happened, Anne? My God, something blew up in the kitchen. A bottle of seltzer blew up. I've still got my son. I walk out there. She's out there working on the glass, and I'm rocking him. We've got all the lights on. I'm rocking him. Don then brought me out of the trance. I was shocked by the unqualified reality of what I had seen. I could just not believe in that moment that the forms persisting in my mind were anything but real, and yet they had to be something else. Surely they did. The morning after the hypnotic session, I awoke not only feeling as if I had been beaten up during the night, I was aware of something new in my mind. At first, the exact nature of this new manifestation was not clear to me. I was oppressed by it. There was an acute impression of being watched. Then I began to realize why I was being watched. There was a face staring directly at me, the grave, implacable, subtly humorous face I had come to recognize from hypnosis. A vivid image of here had emerged in my mind. It was so real I could almost touch it. I think that the image was somehow triggered by hypnosis. Maybe the intense state of concentration evoked it from my unconscious, or maybe I attracted the visitors' attention, and they responded. I felt a strong sense of relationship. Looking at it was more like looking at a person behind soundproof glass than looking at a picture. As I watched, the image moved its nose, revealing that this was obviously a sensitive organ both of touch and smell. The mouth was not straight, but rather one of those rich and complex lines that come to a human mouth with the advance of years. Centered in this mouth was a remarkable expression, the outcome, it seemed to me, of implacable will, leavened by what I can only describe as mirth. There were no lips at all. The chin was strong, very pointed, and there was a general impression that the skin was stretched over a plated bone structure. By far the most arresting feature in this face was the eyes. They were far larger than our own eyes. In them, I once or twice glimpsed a suggestion of black iris and pupil, but it was no more than a suggestion, as if there were optic structures of some kind floating behind those wells of darkness. It was those eyes that I saw staring down at me on October the 4th, those eyes that gleamed so furiously in the faint night light. I remembered them from December 26th, too, and from the summer of 1957. While the image stayed with me, it remained exactly the same as it was when I first saw it. On March 13th, I made a complete physical description on tape. On March 23rd, I would repeat the description again, then compare the two tapes. There was no difference. Late on the night of March 14th, after I'd come back from the hypnosis session covering events in our apartment on East 75th Street, I sat down once again to think things through. The image was with me, of course. I wondered what would happen if I asked it to come to me. I sat there looking at it. It looked back at me. Nothing more happened. The thought flashed through my mind, almost unbidden, that anything I wrote about this experience would be far more intense if I was given some sort of confirmation. The image responded with a sharper stare. On Saturday morning, we went to the country. Our son had invited a friend, and we picked this child up on the way. She was one of his school friends, also 7, and the two of them were full of excitement about their weekend together. Before dinner, I took a walk along a quiet, private road. On the walk, I saw a hair-thin streak of light come straight down out of the sky. I thought, I'm disappointed in myself, or in them. Why such a dismal little manifestation? It was dark when the 4 of us sat down to the dinner table. We had been eating for only a few minutes when our son's guest suddenly shouted, "A little airplane covered with lights just flew through the front yard." There was real shock in this kid's face. The child looked at me, obviously distressed. My impulse was to hide under the table, but I pulled myself together and managed instead to speak in an offhand and reassuring manner. "There's an air base near here," I said. "The National Guard base is 30 miles away." But it was all I could think to say. We don't let these things bother us. Best to just forget about it. I got up and went outside, but saw nothing. Soon the shock subsided, and the children went on eating. After dinner, Anne and I went upstairs and discussed the matter. Frankly, the kid's observation, coming as it did at that moment, had convinced me that on some level what was happening must be real. Why else would the child have made that announcement? Not a word about the visitors had been said within earshot of either of the kids, and the little girl was absolutely without information on the subject. Maybe the child really saw an object in the physical world. But maybe, also, the mind has powers that we do not understand. Perhaps there is such a thing as mental telepathy. And when I asked the image to help me, what I really did was to send my own inner self on a quest. And at the end of its quest, it found this innocent, open little mind, entered it, and there created an hallucination, knowing full well that the little guest would be the last person at the house likely to see anything, and thus the first one to be believed. By 9, both children were fast asleep. I was in a surprisingly benign mood, listening to music on WAMC out of Albany and enjoying being with my wife. We sat together in the parlor in our big upstairs bedroom and got sleepier and sleepier. By the time the clock rang 10, it was all we could do to crawl into bed. We went to sleep. Sometime during the night, I was awakened abruptly by a jab on my shoulder. I came to full consciousness instantly. There were 3 small people standing beside the bed, their outlines clearly visible in the glow of the burglar alarm panel. They were wearing blue coveralls and standing absolutely still. They were familiar figures, not the fierce, huge-eyed, feminine being I have described before, but rather the more dwarf-like ones, stocky and solidly built with grey humanoid faces and glittering, deep-set eyes. They were the ones I felt were the good army when they took me on December 26th. I thought to myself, my God, I'm completely conscious and they're just standing there. I thought that I could turn on the light, perhaps even get out of bed. Then I tried to move my hand, thinking to flip the switch on my bedside lamp and see the time. I can only describe the sensation I felt when I tried to move as like pushing my arm through electrified tar. It took every ounce of attention I possessed to get any movement at all. I turned my head, fighting a pressure that felt as if a sheath of lead had been draped over me, and saw the light switch in the dark. I watched my hand move slowly closer, and finally felt the switch under my finger. I clicked it. Nothing. Tried again. Still nothing. The electricity was off. The burglar alarm was still working because it had battery backup, but apparently it meant little to them as they had entered the house without tripping it. When I turned my head back, I confronted a sight so weird I thought afterwards that I did not know how to write about it. Beside my bed, perhaps 2 feet from my face, close enough to see it plainly without my glasses, was a version of the thin ones, the type I have called her. It was not quite right, though. Its eyes were like big black buttons, round rather than slanted. It appeared to be wearing an inept cardboard imitation of a blue double-breasted suit, complete with a white triangle of handkerchief sticking out of the pocket. I was overcome at this point by terror so fierce and physical that it seemed more biological than physiological. What was I going to do, having called them? Lie here and quake? I had wanted to communicate. I wanted them to know I was still in possession of myself, that despite what I can only describe as a terrific assault against me, physically and mentally, I was still functional, and on some level, independent. Lying in that bed, I felt a very strong sense of responsibility. I had to communicate in some non-threatening manner. I was an emissary of sorts, although perhaps only to the court of nightmare. Again, it took an absolute concentration of will, a centering of my attention, and the application of the most careful effort to the muscles of my face, but I did manage to smile. Instantly, everything changed. They dashed away with a whoosh, and I was plunged almost at once back into sleep. What happened the night of March 15th was fundamentally different and more open than any other contact I have had. The visitors almost irrefutably announced themselves to me. They allowed me to see them while in full possession of my other memories of them, albeit in a more or less completely restrained physical condition. And they preceded their appearance to me by the witness of the uninvolved child, the one person there that night who had absolutely no relationship to this at all. Who had come to see me during the night? Did they really drop down from the sky? Or have they come from some other cosmos, a place where dreams are real, and reality a dream, where shadows and those who cast them are one and the same? My impression is that these people, if they exist, are more than a little afraid of us. They are deeply afraid. I suppose it was best to smile rather than move my hands toward them, but I wish that there had been touch. Could there have been? Or would my fingers have crossed only air? I suppose that I will always wonder. I asked for confirmation, not proof. It seems that they took me at the exact meaning of the word. From the beginning, I had been disturbed that my wife and son might have been involved in this. At least, they had suffered with me through my upheavals. At the worst, they were as entangled as I am. Our son has been preserved from almost all conversation about it and from direct experience of my personal trauma. When Anne was first hypnotized to aid her in recalling the nights of October the 4th and December 26th, she was aware only that something very unusual seemed to have happened on those dates. I did not keep it all from her out of some desire to preserve her the purity of hypnotic recall. I kept it from her because there was a possibility, however remote, that visitors had been around us in the night. Thus, the visitor hypothesis had been discussed by us only in general terms. Only after her first hypnosis, which took place on March 13th, 1986, did I indicate that I felt there might have been some non-human presence involved in our lives. Before hypnosis, Anne had a vague memory of me warning her of fire on the night of October the 4th, of hearing an explosion and our son calling out to me. She had no memories at all of the night of December the 26th. On March the 13th, 1986, Anne was hypnotized by Dr. Robert Nyman. We chose a psychiatrist other than Don Klein so that there could be no possibility of his questions taking on some sort of unnoticed direction because of what he already knew. Anne and I are a very deep, total marriage. If something was really happening to me, then she had to know. She would have some involvement. If she had reported nothing, then to me it would have indicated that mine was an essentially psychological experience, perhaps shared in some unusual ways, but essentially psychological. Despite all the progress I had made in dealing with this experience, I must admit that Anne's hypnosis disturbed me all over again. Her hypnosis does not reveal a person trying to concoct a story, but rather one trying hard to avoid remembering something she had been told in the strongest terms to forget. She was compliant, all right, but not with the hypnotist. She complied, it appears, with something else that issued previous, stronger suggestions. My wife appears to have been made to believe that my mental health depends on her not remembering, on her providing me with a safe haven in ordinary reality when I need one. Let's go to the night of October the 4th, Dr. Nyman began, when Anne was under hypnosis. You and Whitley were there, and your son was there, and you had guests, Jacques and Annie. You've said good night to your guests, and your son is already asleep. You and Whitley went upstairs. Yeah, Anne said. Just give me, to the best of your recollection, what happened that night, concentrating as hard as you can. It wasn't a peaceful night, but I don't remember why. It seems like there was a lot going on. I remember Whitley thought the roof was on fire. I don't remember that. But I remember it was like a culmination of a lot of other activity. I don't. It seems like it was late and not dark, but I don't remember that, and it's not clear. I get the feeling that Whitley was up all night, and it was this thing and that thing, and finally it was the roof. It was something else other than the roof on fire. What's going through your mind now? Nothing. Nothing? Concentrate hard. I just see a light. I mean, it's not dark. It's just that I have my eyes closed and it's not dark. It's light. Whitley woke me up and he thought the roof was on fire. If the roof's on fire, you'd see the roof all lit up. He saw a light that I didn't see. Is it possible that you didn't open your eyes? Yeah. Yet you do make some references to a light that night. Oh, that feeling is gone now. But I don't remember it as a restful night. You know Bud Hopkins is here, of course, and you don't mind if he asks you some questions? Bud asked, "Did you have any dreams that night?" "Don't remember," Annie said. "You said that it had been a restless night because of dreams?" Let me think. I don't think Whitley was there very much. He was gone. You know, he goes sometimes at night. He goes and works. Or he just goes. You have an impression of Whit being away from the bed? Yes. Was it after he said the roof's on fire? I think it was before, too. He was just doing things all night. Did you hear your son? Yes, he sounded so frightened. He gets nightmares sometimes, but he sounded especially frightened, more frightened than usual. Did he say words? Well, he did, but I don't remember what they were. Oh, something really scared him. I thought somebody was doing something to him. Why didn't you go to him? Because Whitley was already on his way. But I remember feeling very uneasy. I wanted to go too, but I felt I shouldn't. Why not? I thought there was something Whitley would... It had to do with him. He was supposed to go. He was supposed to go? He was supposed to go. Oh, it must have been difficult staying in bed. Oh, it was, because I wondered what had happened. Was there something going on in the room, or did Jacques and Annie... No, they weren't in on it. There was something going on. I wanted to know what was going on. There were lots of things going on, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. Why didn't you get up and go see? I couldn't, because I wouldn't. I was afraid to, or I wasn't supposed to. It was like your mother said to you, "You have to stay here. Even if you don't, you're dying to get out and go and see what's going on, but you know because you've been told." Who told you that? Nobody told me. I just had to do it. Have an impulse to turn on the light? Oh, no, no, I wasn't supposed to see. Anne, I want you to do me a favor, Bud said. I want you to have a little dream, a fantasy, about what all that activity was. What's happening? Whitley's supposed to go. They came for Whitley. I'm sorry? They came for Whitley, and he's supposed to go, but I'm not supposed to go. Who came? Nobody that I know of. He just has a feeling that he's supposed to. What was restraining you from going to your son? Oh, I didn't feel restrained. I just felt like I wasn't supposed to go. What about the bang? Maybe that's why it seemed so active that night. Maybe it was noisy. What kind of noises? Just our son. I get the impression... It wasn't a quiet night. I get the impression that someone was there, but it wasn't Jacques and Annie because they were in their room and they stayed in their room, but... And then I remember Annie comforting our boy. It was a woman. I thought it was Annie. It was Annie. You recognized her voice? I think I did. But I get the vague impression that they were in there like a cocoon, locked in that room. Jacques and Annie? Yeah. It's like they couldn't get out, you know. I want you to jump ahead to December the 26th of 1985. What you remember of that day as you concentrate very hard. I remember the owl. I remember Whitley talking about a crystal, too. About a what? A crystal in the sky. But that was before the owl. Did you see it? Oh, no. Why do you say, oh, no, as if... Oh, Whitley saw a lot of things that I didn't see at that time. Did you look for it? Oh, no, because I knew it wasn't real. How did you know it wasn't real? Whitley's a fairly down-to-earth guy. Oh, no, he isn't. He's not? No, because there couldn't be a crystal in the sky. You think Whitley should go to a psychiatrist? No, because he... Well, I think he can deal with these problems. Back to that night. It was so restless. It was like a party. It was like a party and not being invited. What kind of party was it? Well, you know. Jacques and Annie weren't invited either. It was all going on downstairs, and I had to wait for them to come back. It was like your mother says, no, you can't go. Do you think that feeling may have ever happened to you before? Well, I've often felt that there are things going on with Whitley that I wasn't supposed to know. I'm supposed to kind of help him afterwards to deal with it. That's my role. But I can't stop them, you know. He just has to. Do you think that these are things that come out of Whitley's head? No. I don't think he has hallucinations, no. But I think they come to him because of his head. He has a very unique head. Annie, I'd like to ask you, there was a night on LaGuardia Place that something thumped you? Oh, the white thing. Do you have a sense of what that was? Oh, yes, like a sharp jab in the stomach. It was like 4 fingers, not just 1 finger. It was like a joke. But then who would do that? And once, and disappear, you know, woke me right up. Did you open your eyes? No, I don't think so, but I sat up. It woke me up. My son woke up and had a nightmare at the same time and said something poked him in the stomach. And then Whitley, he said something poked him in the stomach. He said he saw a little white thing. I listened to the recording of Anne's first hypnosis on March the 17th, 1986, the Monday after the confirming encounter in the country. I asked her, what do you mean Whitley's supposed to go? Well, that's what I said. Do you see me go? No, but I hear it. There's a lot of noise sometimes. I keep my eyes closed. But don't you worry. No. You're always there in the morning. Anne's testimony had a powerful effect on me. Hers was probably the most remarkable element yet to be introduced into this account. This was because there seemed to be so much unconscious process implied by her testimony. It really did appear that she had performed a function she had been trained to do. And there was that enigmatic female presence. In my own hypnosis, I remembered it making some sort of noises to me when it was beside the bed on the night of October 4th. I was disappearing into the night. I had remembered probes going into my brain. My wife had painted a picture of me as a sort of soldier of the night, vulnerable and helpless. One could state a few things with certainty if one was careful. Something had happened to me and possibly to my son. Its source and nature were unknown. but there was a strong suggestion that it included some sort of physical component external to and independent of us. Another thing that could be stated was that my wife had been aware that something was happening, and she responded by preserving her own neutrality. Maybe she had been trained to do this, and maybe not. It could also be that she was doing it out of an instinct to help her husband. The support she had provided may have been her own invention rather than the outcome of training or suggestion from the visitors. While Anne's hidden role seemed to be that of passive supporter, her own life role is very different. It was clearly revealed by a statement she made before the second session, when Dr. Nyman asked her if her presence in his office was voluntary. If I had said, "No, I'm not going through with this," I wouldn't be here. She is as independent a person as I know, a committed feminist who is politically and socially as active as she cares to be. Except when it comes to this. In this matter, she is passive, which is in itself awfully strange. As the intensity of the experience built, Anne became uneasy with her role. Things were going on, and I wanted to know what was going on. Her tone became forceful, almost angry. When asked why she didn't simply go and see, she repeated that she wasn't supposed to. Supporting this came the first of a number of what she feels are references to a female authority. It was like your mother said to you, "You have to stay here." Anne's hypnosis strongly suggested that I'm taken all the time. When she was being hypnotized, Anne had no idea at all that I remembered more than 2 occasions when something strange happened. She said frankly that she did not consider me a down-to-earth guy. I'm glad of that. After all that appears to have been happening, she would have to be incredibly imperceptive to think that I was down to earth. Dr. Nyman quite naturally asked her if she thought I should go to a psychiatrist. Her reply was interesting. No, because I think he can deal with these problems. What? I'm seeing things, and my practical, no-nonsense wife doesn't think I should see a psychiatrist? Perhaps she knew that there would be no point, because on the level she would not directly address, she was aware that these are the side effects of real experience. I've asked my son to describe any strange dreams he recalls. He has never been hypnotized, and he won't be until he can decide for himself if he wishes to do it. No matter what the source, this material can be very disturbing indeed under hypnosis, and it is certainly not the business of a parent to assault a child's mind by such experimentation. Here are some of my son's dreams in his own words. Well, I was dreaming that I was on a boat with my friend Ezra, and we were about to dive off, and I was in the middle of the air when I switched to this dream where I was in the hospital in the future, where they were trying to cure some kind of disease. And I was taken out of my bed and onto a cot and out on the porch. Who took you out of your bed onto the cot? Some kind of doctor. What did he look like? Oh, he was a very short and fat man with glasses that came out pointed upward. And he always has a big fake smile on him. Did you see him when he wasn't smiling? Yeah. Well, when he was doing the operation on me. What kind of operation? It was a disease on my arm. He did something to your arm? No, wait, he kept your nose cold like when you eat a lot of ice cream. You say you were examined on the porch. What do you mean by that? Well, they took me out onto the porch. There was no way to get me into an operation room because of all the moving equipment. They took special lights and examined my nose and took x-rays and stuff. Ever remember a dream where a monster came in the house and Mommy fainted? What's that from? Oh, that's one of my journal stories. Yeah? Why'd you make that one up for your journal? I don't know. It was a free journal story period, and I couldn't think of anything. I was tossing and turning in my desk trying to think of something, and then suddenly that dream just popped into my head. What was it like, that dream? Was in a cornfield, my mommy and me, and I was chewing on this piece of corn, and my mom was telling fairy tales. And then suddenly this big, let's say from the lobby of this building up to the top, hovered over us. It was colored orange-green, had blue feet. Do you suppose you were seeing something flying over you that was blue and orange and green, and you were confused as to what it was? It was like it was flying, kind of. At this point, I felt I had made a mistake with my last question. It was so heavily weighted with suggestion. I sat in my chair, haunted by what my son had said. I will relate a dream I had had shortly before we spoke. The three of us were together in an English countryside in my dream. We had rented a cottage. Inside of the cottage was identical to our cabin. I was confused because Anne and our son were not there, and it was already evening. I was sitting up in bed when I got a call on the phone. I remember saying to the caller, "No, it's all right. They're just staying out all night." On some level, I was full of fear, but on another, I seemed to have accepted their disappearance by justifying it to myself. In the middle of the night, there was a knock at the front door. I opened it to find my son in the company of a group of rescue workers, ordinary men and women with deep, soft, and loving faces. My son was naked except for a dark blue cap that one of them had put on his head. He was moving strangely, as if he had no control over his muscles. His eyes looked as if he were in some sort of trance. I gathered him up in my arms because they told me that touch and hugging would bring him back to normal. Then I looked around for my wife. They shook their heads sadly, and the care and love radiating from their eyes was such that I was not bereaved but reassured that she would be back soon. Then I was abruptly transported to another place. I was given to understand that Anne and our son had been found here, hiding. It was a cornfield, just like our son's dream. At bedtime that night, he wanted to talk more about his dreams. I did not record our conversation, but he complained of two things. The first was that when he started to go to sleep, his whole body would tingle, and he would feel as if his hair was standing on end. A voice would then ask him about his day, how he felt, and private things, which he did not wish to discuss with me. He also complained that he saw a skeleton looking at him when he was trying to relax. The conversation went as follows. "A skeleton?" "Yes. And it keeps staring at me like it was right in front of my face, and it won't go away." "What does it look like?" "Well, it's not a skeleton. It's one of the thin ones that stood around behind the doctors." "What thin ones?" "You know, the thin ones that are always saying, 'We won't hurt you.' Them. It's not a skeleton. It's one of the thin ones." The appearance of these people has never been discussed with my son at all, not by anybody, and yet his description of short ones and taller thin ones is not only consistent with my own observations, it is consistent with the experiences of many of the other people who have encountered the visitors. My historical survey has found that the core experience of seeing flying discs and small figures goes back a long, long time. I have spent a great deal of time in the past few months searching what could only be described as a morass of literature on the subject of unidentified entities and their craft. I have talked to scientists who think that it's all nonsense, and to scientists who are not so sure. I have read dozens of case histories and have met many people who have had visitor experiences. Something is happening. This is clear. It is not a version of known phenomena. There is some small reason to speculate that the United States government may have had some sort of communication from visitors as early as the late 1940s, as well as obtained pieces of crashed discs and bodies of the occupants. I base this notion on the two best pieces of evidence I could find, both of which I have personally investigated and confirmed as genuine. These two pieces of evidence are certainly real, in the sense that they are not witting hoaxes. The first document is a letter written by Dr. Robert I. Sarbacher, dated November 29, 1983, addressed to Mr. William Steinman, a UFO researcher who has inquired about Sarbacher's government consulting activities during the late 40s. Dr. Sarbacher was a Department of Defense Research and Development Board consultant during the Eisenhower administration. Educated at Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and Princeton, he is the author of Hyper and Ultra-High Frequency Engineering, Research Accrediting at Military Establishments, and the Encyclopedia Dictionary of Electronics and Engineering. Dr. Sarbacher writes in part, "Relating to my own experiences regarding recovered flying saucers, I had no association with any of the people involved in the recovery and have no knowledge regarding the dates of the recoveries. About the only thing I remember at this time is that certain materials reported to have come from flying saucer crashes were extremely light and very tough. I am sure our laboratories analyzed them very carefully. There were reports that instruments or people operating these machines were also of very light weight, sufficient to withstand the tremendous deceleration and acceleration associated with their machinery. I remember, in talking with some of the people at the office, that I got the impression that these aliens were constructed like certain insects we have observed on Earth. I still do not know why the high order of classification has been given, and why the denial of the existence of these devices. My hypnotic transcripts continually refer to my impression that I was dealing with creatures that moved like insects. I did not know of Dr. Sarbacher and his letter until August the 9th, 1986, months after I had my experiences. My second piece of evidence that the government may know more about this than it is saying is a small but telling one. A press release that was issued in July 1947. In that month, an incident took place on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico, that is the granddaddy of all the government has UFO alien bodies rumors. Throughout 1947, there were many reports in the New Mexico newspapers of odd lights. But the first modern flying disc sighting near Mount Rainier, Washington, had been heavily publicized at the time, and some of the New Mexico sightings may have been the result of confused observations of two V-2 launches at White Sands. One took place on June 12th and another on July the 3rd. However, on the evening of July the 2nd, something was seen by members of the public in the skies over Roswell and reported locally. This object was brightly lit and crossed the skies in a northwesterly direction. On July the 8th, the Roswell Army Air Base issued a release which was published, among other places, in the San Francisco Chronicle. The release was issued by Public Relations Officer Lieutenant Walter Haut, on order from the base commander, and it read, "The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Action was immediately taken, and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Jesse A. Marcel to higher headquarters." Later, A report was issued to the effect that this disc was a crushed weather balloon. Under the headline, "Disc Solution Collapses," the Chronicle reported that General Roger M. Ramey had stated that the wreckage was a high-altitude weather observation device that consisted of a box kite and a balloon. Later, in the same story, General Ramey is reported to have said that it was a star-shaped tinfoil target designed to reflect radar. Since General Ramey claimed to have the debris in his office, it is strange that he could not seem to settle on an identification for it. Much has been made of the fact that the original discoverer of the device, rancher W.W. Brazel, was quoted by the Associated Press as being sorry he told about it, and describing what he found as tinfoil and other debris. There are three enormous problems with the credibility of the rancher's statements. The first is that he was held incommunicado for days before he made them. The second is that members of his family have asserted that he made them under duress, and his being held incommunicado, which is a matter of record, would certainly support that assertion. The third problem is more telling because it does not rely on the rancher's verisimilitude at all. It is that none of the officers originally involved ever thought that they were dealing with the remains of known objects, or they never would have allowed their press release to be issued in the first place. Was Mr. Brazel interrogated in order to induce him to change his story? There seems to be no other logical conclusion. The inescapable fact of the Roswell affair is that a group of professionally competent Air Force officers caused the publication of a press release claiming that the Air Force had recovered a crashed flying disc after observing the debris. Only after this release was published was any attempt made to change the story. Even then, neither the release nor the professional competence of its author, his base commander, or the concerned intelligence officers was ever called into question. Publicly, or, as far as I was able to discern, in internal Air Force procedures. Instead, the original witness, who was in no position to know what he had actually seen, was placed under duress and compelled to change his story. It appears that there is more than a shred of evidence that there are visitors here, and that they are doing something that involves us. It is also obvious from their secrecy that they want very much to hide. Can it be that the government is inadvertently helping them to do this, or even that they have somehow compelled it to act as it does? Certainly, the combination of visitor and government secrecy has led to profound public confusion. We do not know what is going on. Maybe the visitor experience is what happens when the human mind looks into the mirror and discovers that its own reflection is not only real, but fearful to see. Something is here, but what? And from where? We come at last to the essence of the mystery. We do not and cannot know the actual condition of life elsewhere in the universe because we are presently too ignorant of conditions outside our own immediate solar neighborhood. However, judging from the amount of evidence available, it may be possible to expand our knowledge simply by taking the flying disc and the abductee phenomena seriously. We may or may not find visitors, but we would certainly find a body of data so compelling and multidimensional in its complexity that merely stating useful hypotheses about it is going to be a major challenge, not only to the physical and behavioral sciences, but also to the science and art of language. It is our American habit to assume that there is something irrelevant, even a little silly, about the past. Our relationship to former times is expressed as nostalgia, not history. When our government first started studying flying saucers in the late 40s, it never even occurred to anybody official to consider having a look at the past. Here are two stories. In the little town of Merkel, Texas, on April 26, 1897, a group of people going home from church at night allegedly saw a heavy object dragging along the ground. They followed it until it bounced across a railroad track and caught on one of the rails. It was an anchor, tied to a rope. When they looked up, they saw an airship with lighted windows and a headlight on the front, brighter than the light of a locomotive. 10 minutes passed, and soon a man was seen coming down the rope. He was small and wearing a blue sailor suit. When he saw the people, he cut the rope, and the ship sailed off into the night, leaving the anchor behind. The small beings I first saw were dressed in dark blue coveralls. This is not a unique description of the visitor's garb. Perhaps it is sort of a night uniform. One Sunday, in the borough of Clorera in Ireland, the parishioners of the church of St. Kinarius heard a noise on the roof. They went outside and saw an anchor embedded in the eaves. The anchor line rose up into the sky, where there floated a ship on the air. A man leaped overboard and swam down to the anchor. After an altercation with the parishioners, he cut the rope and managed to return to the ship, which sailed away. The anchor remained in the church, but has since been lost. Since this incident took place not in 1897, but around AD 1211. During the reign of Pepin in the early Middle Ages, the French were bothered by apparitions that were seen marching through the sky, camped out in tents on the reaches of heaven, and sometimes in wonderfully constructed aerial ships that flew past in veritable squadrons. People were annoyed at the presence of all this unquestionable grandeur and happiness, and both Charlemagne and his successor, Louis the Debonair, imposed penalties on the tyrants of the air. As counter-propaganda, the sylphs kidnapped people and took them to their airy abode, showing them their world. But when the people were sent home, they were all burned at the stake without a second's hesitation. My point is that there may be far more to this than science or government or even religion can separately address. It would seem that our civilization is not paying attention to what may be the central archetypal and mythological experience of our age. If so, then this is the first time that man has simply refused to respond to the ghosts and the gods. Is that why they have become so physical, so real, dragging people out of bed like rapists in the night, because they must have our notice in order to somehow be confirmed in their own truth? This may be primarily a matter of visions and chimeras, battering at the door of physical reality. They are not simply flickering effects of the mind. Something is out there and wants in. Whomever and whatever the visitors are, their activities go far beyond a mere study of mankind. They are involved with us on very deep levels, playing in the band of dream, weaving imagination and reality together until they begin to seem what they probably are, different aspects of a single continuum. To really begin to perceive the visitors adequately, it is going to be necessary to invent a new discipline of vision, one that combines the mystic's freedom of imagination with the substantial intellectual rigor of the scientist. Maybe there really is another species living upon this earth, the fairies, the gnomes, the sylphs, vampires, goblins, who attach to reality along a different line than we do, but who know and love us, as we do the wild things of the woods, who, perhaps, are trying to save us from ourselves, or whose lives are inextricably linked to our own. If we die, Must the gods, the fairies, the elves then fall into some blue glen of unknowing? Will their secret world go cold without us? Or will there only be less excitement? The visitors often appear in threes. They project triangular lights. They have been reported to wear various types of triangular devices and emblems. People see 3 pyramids or 3 triangles in connection with them. A huge triangular-shaped object is sometimes sighted. I had triangles etched on my arm. In order to approach an initial understanding of the visitor experience, if that is possible, it might be productive to explore the inner meaning of the triangular shape. There are many ancient traditions that view man as being with 3 parts: body, mind, and heart. It seems possible that the visitors view themselves as an entire species with 3 parts, judging from the 3 distinct basic forms that have been seen. The fundamental idea of the triad as a creative energy is that 2 opposite forces coming into balance create a 3rd force. The idea of the triad is not static. It is an expression of a series of emanations. The 3rd force emerges when the 1st and 2nd forces come into balance, and when all 3 are in harmony, they become a 4th thing, an indivisible whole. When we were first married, Anne and I found a motto for ourselves in the Bible, from Ecclesiastes: 2 are better than 1, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly snapped. Anne cross-stitched it, and it has been with us ever since. The 3rd strand is the love, then the child, then the long unraveling of the years. At last, it is what is left of a lifetime spent together, the fading remembrance, the generations to come, and also the joy that ripens in souls. For there to be a growth instead of death, much more must be brought to the triad than mere conquest or contact, which, if the visitors are as advanced as they seem, would amount to a form of conquest. Communion is as wide as all the knowledge of both partners, as deep as their whole souls. Marriage requires patience, giving without thought to keep accounts. When one says, "I gave this, and so I am owed that," the marriage has not yet begun. Real sharing rests in a balanced recognition of sameness and difference. It is a discovery of balances and equalities. We need to give ourselves to our experience without knowing what it is, trusting that our understanding will grow as we proceed. To participate truly in this experience, we must marry the unknown. The only belief is the question itself. Love is a matter of leaping out into the sky. We do not even know if there are visitors. We do not know what we are, why this is happening, or exactly what is happening. The real center of the experience lies not in some facile explanation. It lies in opening oneself to the question as it really exists, with all its mystery and danger. Our agony is to stand before the utter blackness of the unknown with full knowledge that there is something there, and it is alive, and if one is to remain on the path of inner search, one must trust it, even though it may very certainly be dangerous. Strength is needed to endure the fire, courage to enter it, intelligence to come out alive. I do not have it in me to be a believer, nor can I be a true skeptic, for I loathe the narrow and love the broad. I cannot say in all truth that I am certain the visitors are present as entities entirely independent of their observers. Nor can I say I do not think they are here at all. It is not enough for us to ascribe the visitor experience to some unusual manifestation of known phenomena and then ignore it. Science has not explained the visitors. Indeed, it has not even begun to explore them. Nor is it sufficient to say that higher beings are studying us and remain passively waiting for what tidbits of knowledge they may toss us. The visitor experience drives us to extremes. Those who have seen the devices or their occupants are often convinced that they are extraterrestrial in origin, and science debunks that, just as the clergy debunked the fairies in centuries past, and for the same reason. These outrageous enigmatics so threaten the established order of belief that they must at all costs be rejected. There was no room in 17th century Christian theology for fairies, and there is scarcely more in 20th century scientific theory of visitors as peculiar as these. But the difference between science and theology is that science can make room for new things. Looking back over my experience with the visitors, I cannot say that I felt inferior to them. On the contrary, the people I encountered did not seem superior so much as wiser, but also more simple and unformed as individuals. And they not only feared me, they seemed in awe of me. They are not all-powerful super beings. They are frail, limited individuals, far from home, if indeed this world is not their home. I can discern a visible agenda of contact in what is happening. Over the past 40 or so years, their involvement with us has not only been deepening, it has been spreading rapidly through the society. At least, this is how things appear. The truth may be that it is not their involvement that is increasing, but our perception that is becoming sharper. The evolution of this increase in perception may have a very definite design. We initially noticed objects from afar, then closer. Then we remembered seeing the visitors, and now we are beginning to remember being with them. Will the visitors emerge into our world on a flood of memory? And if so, then why? Look, why not simply land, open the hatch, and come out? It could be that they wish to avoid what Cortez did with such eagerness. It is not difficult to crush the flower of a culture's spontaneity. Would we not all risk being lost in non-meaning if an apparently superior visitor culture emerged suddenly into the open? Science, religion, even the arts might be shattered by the appearance of a culture that already knew everything we want to know about the universe. Unless, of course, it were to emerge not into blinded awe, but into our understanding of its truth, its strengths, as well as its weaknesses. I would not be at all surprised if the visitors are real and are slowly coming into contact with us according to an agenda of their own devising, which proceeds as human understanding increases. If they are not from our universe, it could be necessary for us to understand them before they can emerge into our reality. In our universe, their reality may depend on our belief. Thus, the corridor into our world could, in a very true sense, be through our own minds. This is not a mere matter to be explained away by one facile dodge or another. It is an immense human reality, vast in its impact and complexity. It has coherence, strange but undeniable, and thus there is certainly a process of thought that will draw it into our understanding. Presently, It is lacking effective definition. To leave it this way, when it seems so rich with potential, would be a shame. But has science the wit to study such an elusive and multi-dimensional enigma? I say yes, resoundingly so. Even a brilliant but arrogant curmudgeon of my acquaintance, who denounced it all as preposterous, is important to an understanding of it. Blind denial is as empty a response as blind acceptance, and operates on the same level of validity. There is no real intellectual difference between the haughty psychiatrist or physicist and his refusal to accept the truth, and the nervous contactee eager to see the phenomenon as a dimensionless cartoon of space friends. We must break through both distortions, and we certainly can. The visitor experience may be our first true quantum discovery in the large-scale world. The very act of observing it may be creating it as a concrete actuality with sense, definition, and a consciousness of its own. And perhaps, in their world, the visitors are working as hard to create us. Truly, such an act of mutual insight and courage would be communion. Two universes spinning each other together. The old weaver of reality rethreading creation's loom. Something is here, be it a message from the stars, or from the booming labyrinth of the mind, or from both. It must have left a signature somewhere, a thread in the snow, the scratch of a strange nail upon a wall. And we can certainly find that thread if we bring humor and honesty and courage and great care to the effort. In taking the thread, we might find ourselves in possession of a very real key to the universe. Once the thread is in hand, our own mythology will tell us where it leads, for it will be the same thread that the maiden Ariadne handed to Theseus when he stood before the maze of the Minotaur, young and strong and mad with courage. And we will all go down the labyrinth to meet whatever awaits us there.
Thanks for listening. Check out some other great audiobooks in the description.